This is the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Talking about the apparitions of the Virgin Mary in Zeitoun, Egypt. And I want to tell you about these because here our lady said nothing, and yet she communicated to the masses. Here, whether you were Christian or Jew or whether you were Muslim, whether you were atheist, it didn't matter. She became visible to all. And this is an incredible moment in the 20th century and really, I think, for our faith. The year was 1968. It was a tumultuous year. If you remember the late 60s, the Vietnam was underway. There were protests in the streets of America. There were political riots. And, of course, the Middle East was also in tumult because of the Six-Day War that Israel had fought against Egypt the year before when Israel took the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. And the Egyptians, of course, were reeling from that loss, and it cast their society into turmoil. So you can see the chaos of the late 60s, not just in our own country, but globally. And on April 2nd, something incredible took place. There was a Muslim bus mechanic. His name was Farouk Mohammed Atwa, and he was working in the evening across the street from this church. It was St. Mary's Coptic Church in a place called Zeitoun in a district of Cairo. And as he was working, he happened just to glance up at the church, and he saw a lady. He saw what he thought was a lady getting ready to throw herself down to the ground, to commit suicide is what he thought. And he pointed it out to the others who thought the same thing. So they called the police, and soon a crowd gathered around this church. But this woman on the top of this big dome, on top of this church, she never threw herself down. Instead, she simply vanished. Well, the police chalked it up to some sort of trick, right? It had to be. Trick of the lights, mass hallucination from these people. There had to be a logical explanation for this. But a week later, that same woman was back. And the same thing happened. She was visible to everyone there and then disappeared. And for the next 3 years, she would appear off and on at the same church for varying lengths of time with all kinds of different phenomena accompanying these apparitions. They would see luminous doves at night. The smell of this powerful incense would roll down the streets. I mean, investigations went in to see if there was some sort of, machinery behind these manifestations. And there's no explanation for what took place. In fact, the images that were captured here are spectacular. Competent eyewitnesses, experts in the field have examined them. They're not doctored. And actually, there are photographs capturing the Mother of God. I many years ago produced a documentary called Marian Apparitions of the 20th Century. And one of the segments that I included in this film was on the Zeitoun, Egypt apparitions. And there, if you have that documentary, you'll be able to see I included much of the film. I have eyewitness reports. In fact, you're going to hear, coming up here in just a moment, from a woman who was present for those apparitions in 1968. Her name is Pearl Zaki, but she's going to be joining us, along with a man who has done wonders to promote this. But just to give you perspective before we get into our conversation here, I just want to help you to better understand the significance of this. I personally believe, this is my personal belief, that we live in very special times, that God is reaching out to mankind in an unprecedented fashion. And if you look back at just the past several decades, we on Earth have been experiencing what I would call a major supernatural episode. There are reports of unusual events, spiritual events, and they're coming from every habitable continent. They came from deep within the former Soviet Union, where under communist rule, there were reports of towering apparitions of the Mother of God. And she came announcing the fall of communism. I was present in the jungles of Africa before the great genocide that would take place there in 94. I was there for the last approved apparition of the Mother of God, where she came earlier to these seers warning of genocide. She warned of the return of Jesus Christ. I've been present in war-torn Yugoslavia, where the Virgin has been reported to appear since 1981, down in South America, where a mystic claimed to have visions of the Mother of God, where the sun would spin on a mountainside in Venezuela. I spoke to a nun in Akita, Japan, who saw a statue weep 101 times. Those tears, no explanation for them, were human tears. And Mother of God spoke to her as well. Those are just a few, whether it's Europe or Asia or Nicaragua or the Middle East and Africa, even here in our own country. come reports of an apparitional woman calling herself the Blessed Virgin Mary. And she's appearing to visionaries. She gives them inspiration and instructions and messages. And in some of these, warnings about the future of the world. Our Lady came there. Fatima was the daughter of Muhammad. Is it possible that the Virgin Mary appeared in 68 to Muslims and Jews and Catholic Christians as well as non-Christians for a particular message? There are reports of her appearing in Iraq and in Syria. Will it be the Virgin Mary, the Mother of God, who will bring about a great conversion of our Muslim brothers and sisters, just as she did in Aztec Mexico back in 1531? I'm joined this afternoon by a good friend of mine, longtime friend. In fact, if it wasn't for him, the film I produced, Marrying Apparitions of the 20th Century, never would have been possible. It really was. I've got to credit his vision, his dream, and his efforts behind the scenes that made that possible. And that's a film that looks at the apparitions of the 20th century and shows that even though the Mother of God's appearing in separate places, these are all intertwined. And there's a much bigger message that the Mother of God is appearing. His name's Bob Ott, and he joins me today. Bob, thank you for all you do. And it is so good to have you here with me today on this anniversary.
Well, Drew, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. Let's put some perspective on this. And in particular, Zeitoun, you and I were talking briefly, how these photos were not doctored and how these perhaps are, one of the most spectacular apparitions to actually capture photographs of the Virgin Mary. But your thoughts, I want you to take it away.
Yeah, so there's a uniqueness to this apparition site, as you mentioned, that's extraordinary. To my knowledge and my investigation, there's nothing like this ever to have happened in the world. So the uniqueness is that in most apparition sites, Our Lady chooses one or sometimes a couple of visionaries to show herself to. However, in this particular situation, most everyone, and Pearl Zaki will attest to this, most everyone who actually is there when she appears gets the opportunity to see her, which is very, very unique. The second thing that's, I think, extremely unique is the pictures themselves. I know that there has been a lot of investigation, and I think there's at least 12 pictures that we know that were taken, and they have been looked at and analyzed scientifically in so many different directions by so many different people to see if there's any possibility that they've been tampered with or doctored up, and they have not been. So here's a situation where actually we have an opportunity to actually view a picture, a photo of our Blessed Mother. Now that is in itself incredibly unique. People may question, why did Mary appear here and why so often here? Well, if you study the history of our church, you'll know that the Blessed Mother and Joseph fled to Egypt. Well, this area where she's appearing is where she lived with Joseph and the baby Jesus for a number of years. And I'm sure those were very special years to Mary, so very special to her heart. So that's one reason why I think she came here. But Pearl's going to talk a little bit about that as well in terms of her feelings as to why she appeared there and what it means for everyone. But the Jewish people, the Muslims, the Christians, the Coptics, every religion saw her and were very moved by it, and it truly affected the entire country of Egypt when she appeared there.
And most apparitions, Bob, they're limited to a chosen few. I mean, if you take Fatima, 3 children saw her. If you go to La Salette, 2 children saw her there. Even in Champion, Wisconsin, the approved apparitions in our own country, just Sister Adele saw her. Young Adele Bryce saw her, and the companions did not see her. Quite often, it's invisible to those who are around. I have been present for many apparitions, but they were not for my eyes. They were simply for the seers. When I was in Africa, Alfonsina Moriki had her last vision. I was right next to her when the Mother of God appeared, and yet I could not see anything. This apparition is so unique in that perspective because she appeared to the masses, and I'm curious as to why that is, because she never spoke a word. Like in Knock, where she appeared, there was no word spoken, yet she communicated a very powerful message. Well,
so her actions, though, too, Drew, was this. She didn't say a word, but her actions said a lot. In other words, if you study all of her appearances, they've been looked at in terms of what she actually did. 90% of the time, her hands were folded. She was praying. She was kneeling in front of the cross many times. A few times she actually had the baby Jesus she was holding. And other times she would be blessing the people. There were even times where people said rays came from her hands right down to the people as she was looking at them, as if she was blessing them with the graces coming from her hands. So there were a lot of silent words, you might say, that were being said by her actions and what she did.
Well, I think it's a message that she's the mother of all people. You know, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Jew, whether you're Christian, she's all of our mother. And she came at a very troubled time in human history, and I think that was a very telling message. Before I go to Pearl, I also want to, Bob, just get your perspective, because I really think, I think back to Aztec Mexico, when there was so much, pagan worship. There was a culture of death that was so prevalent at the time. We had the Protestant Reformation taking place in the 1531. At the same time, the Mother of God appears over here as well. And we have 9 million conversions to the Catholic faith. Our Muslim brothers and sisters, I hope, will one day come into the faith. And if anyone is going to bring about that conversion, I've always personally held the belief that it would be the Mother of God that would kind of facilitate that transition. Your thoughts on that? What role do you see her playing in the new evangelization, in particular for bridging the gap between Islam and Catholicism and Christianity?
Yeah, I personally believe, just from this apparition that took place in 1968 through 1970, and by the way, Our Lady has appeared there since that time a number of times, but so the majority of the people in Cairo, Egypt, saw our Blessed Mother. And I think the percentage of Muslim was very high. I'm not sure what the percentage was, maybe 70, 80%. Mm-hmm. So they, in their hearts, because I went over there and I spoke with many of them, in their hearts, a lot of them have a great love and honor for our Blessed Mother, and they know who she is. So they may not always speak it necessarily, but they know Mary is real, that she appeared. And I believe, Drew, as well, that Mary is going to be the one who is going to lead our Muslim brothers and sisters to Christ, so to speak. She was the one who introduced, our Blessed Mother, the one who introduced Christ to the world back then, right, and she's doing it again.
Hey, you can join me and listen on the Relevant Radio app to The Drew Mariani Show live each weekday at 2 to 5 Central. Thanks for listening.